Imagine a world where neighbors disappear overnight, where the sound of boots on cobblestones means terror, and where a child's laughter can be silenced simply because of who they are. This was the reality of the Holocaust, a chapter so dark that even decades later, its shadows stretch across generations. 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, were targeted not for what they did but for who they were. It was a crime against humanity, carried out with chilling precision. This story is not about numbers alone. It is about faces, families, and futures stolen. To understand the Holocaust is to confront the depths of human cruelty and to recognize the resilience of those who endured. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with words. Adolf Hitler's rise to power in 1933 unleashed a torrent of propaganda that painted Jews as enemies of the German people. Newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts spread lies that seeped into everyday life. Ordinary citizens were taught to see their neighbors as threats. Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in 1938, shattered illusions of safety. Synagogues burned, Jewish businesses were destroyed, and thousands were arrested. For many, this was the moment they realized survival itself was now in question. Families whispered of escape, but borders closed and indifference reigned. The world watched, but few acted. The Holocaust was not only the story of victims and perpetrators, it was also the story of bystanders. As war erupted in 1939, ghettos were established across occupied Poland. Jews were forced into overcrowded, walled-off sections of cities, cut off from the outside world. Hunger gnawed, disease spread, and hope dwindled. Yet even in these ghettos, life persisted. Children played in hidden corners, teachers taught in secret, and communities clung to faith. The ghettos were prisons, but they were also the first step in a machinery of extermination that would later lead to concentration camps. To understand the Holocaust, we must look back before Hitler. Anti-Semitism had deep roots in Europe, stretching across centuries. Jews were scapegoated during plagues, accused of poisoning wells, and forced into ghettos long before the Nazis. They were barred from owning land, excluded from guilds, and often confined to moneylending, a profession that fueled resentment. This long history of prejudice created fertile ground for Nazi ideology to take hold. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany was broken. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations, the economy collapsed and humiliation spread. People sought someone to blame. Jews, despite being a small minority, became convenient targets. Conspiracy theories claimed they controlled banks, manipulated politics, and profited from war. These lies were not whispered in corners, they were shouted in rallies and printed in newspapers. The rise of nationalism across Europe further isolated Jews. In many countries, they were seen as outsiders, never fully belonging. Pogroms in Eastern Europe, violent attacks on Jewish communities, left scars and fueled migration. Yet even in new lands, prejudice followed. By the time Hitler rose to power, anti-Semitism was not a fringe belief, it was woven into the fabric of society. This history matters because it shows the Holocaust was not an accident of war. It was the culmination of centuries of hatred, sharpened by modern propaganda and weaponized by a regime determined to annihilate. Adolf Hitler was not born into power, he seized it through manipulation, charisma, and violence. After World War I, he joined the German Workers' Party, which he soon transformed into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. His speeches electrified crowds, promising to restore Germany's pride and blaming Jews for its downfall. He offered simple answers to complex problems, and in a time of despair, people listened. The Nazi Party grew rapidly, fueled by propaganda and paramilitary violence. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor. Within months, democracy collapsed, the Reichstag fire was used to suspend civil liberties, and political opponents were arrested. The Enabling Act gave Hitler dictatorial powers. Germany was no longer a democracy, it was a dictatorship. Jews were immediately targeted, excluded from professions, and marked as outsiders. Hitler's rise was not inevitable, it was enabled by fear, economic despair, and the willingness of ordinary people to believe his lies. The Holocaust began not with camps, but with a leader who convinced a nation to embrace hatred. In 1935, the Nazi regime codified its hatred into law. The Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship, forbade marriage between Jews and non-Jews, and excluded them from public life. These laws were not just legal restrictions, they were declarations that Jews were no longer part of the German nation. The laws reached into every corner of life. Jews were banned from schools, professions, and even parks. Signs appeared reading "Jews Not Wanted." Families who had lived in Germany for generations suddenly found themselves stateless, stripped of rights and dignity. The Nuremberg laws also targeted others deemed undesirable: Roma, people with disabilities, and those considered racially impure. The Nazi obsession with racial purity created a hierarchy where only Aryans were valued. This ideology justified exclusion, persecution, and eventually extermination. For Jews, the laws were devastating. They were no longer citizens, no longer protected, and no longer safe. The Nuremberg laws marked a turning point. Discrimination was no longer social prejudice, it was state policy. On November 9–10, 1938, Germany erupted in violence. Synagogues burned, Jewish businesses were smashed, and homes were destroyed. This was Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. The streets glittered with shattered windows, but behind the glass lay shattered lives. The violence was orchestrated by the Nazi regime, disguised as a spontaneous uprising. Over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to camps. Hundreds were killed, and countless families were left homeless. For many Jews, Kristallnacht was the moment they realized escape was no longer optional, it was survival. The world watched, but few acted. Newspapers reported the violence, but governments closed their borders. Refugees seeking safety were turned away. Kristallnacht revealed not only the brutality of the Nazis but also the indifference of the world. Kristallnacht was more than broken glass. It was broken trust, broken communities, and broken futures. It marked the transition from discrimination to destruction, from exclusion to extermination. The Holocaust was no longer a threat on the horizon, it had begun. On September 1, 1939, the world changed forever. German tanks rolled across the Polish border, unleashing a war that would engulf the globe. For Poland's Jewish population, one of the largest in Europe, the invasion marked the beginning of unimaginable suffering. Overnight, communities that had thrived for centuries were thrust into chaos. Families fled their homes, synagogues were desecrated, and fear became the air people breathed. The invasion was not just a military campaign. It was the opening act of genocide. The Nazis wasted no time in implementing their policies. Jewish leaders were arrested, intellectuals targeted, and entire neighborhoods cordoned off. Soldiers marched through towns, stripping Jews of property and dignity. The brutality was immediate and deliberate. For many, the dream of escape vanished as borders closed and the machinery of occupation tightened its grip. Poland became the testing ground for Nazi policies. Ghettos were established, forced labor imposed, and terror normalized. The invasion was not only about conquering land, it was about reshaping society to fit Nazi ideology. Jews were marked for destruction, and Poland was the stage where the Holocaust began to unfold in full force. For ordinary Polish Jews, life became a daily struggle for survival. Families whispered of rumors, camps, deportations, disappearances, but few could imagine the scale of what was to come. The invasion of Poland was the spark that ignited the Holocaust, a tragedy that would spread across Europe and consume millions of lives. The ghettos were prisons without bars designed to isolate and destroy. In cities like Warsaw, Łódź, and Krakow, Jews were forced into overcrowded districts, cut off from the outside world. Streets once filled with laughter now echoed with hunger and despair. Families crammed into tiny rooms, sharing scraps of food and clinging to hope. Starvation was deliberate. Rations were meager, often less than 200 calories a day. Children begged in the streets, their faces hollow, their eyes pleading. Disease spread rapidly, claiming lives before bullets ever did. The ghettos were not meant to sustain life, they were meant to break it. Yet even in these conditions, resilience shone. Secret schools taught children, underground theaters performed plays, and religious services continued in hidden corners. The ghettos became places of defiance, where culture and identity refused to die. Survival was not only physical, it was spiritual. The ghettos were a cruel prelude to extermination. They stripped away dignity, weakened bodies, and prepared victims for deportation, but they also revealed the strength of human spirit, a refusal to surrender even in the face of despair. Resistance in the ghettos was born from desperation and courage. Armed groups formed, smuggling weapons and planning uprisings. Young men and women risked everything to fight back, knowing the odds were impossible. Their goal was not victory, but dignity, to show the world that Jews did not go quietly. Underground newspapers circulated, spreading news and hope. Secret networks smuggled food, medicine, and information. Resistance was not only about guns, it was about preserving humanity. Teachers taught in basements, rabbis preached in whispers, and artists painted in secret. Every act of defiance was a declaration, we are still here. The Nazis responded with brutality. Informants were hunted, leaders executed, and entire families punished. It was fueled by the belief that even in death, dignity mattered. The ghettos became battlegrounds, not of armies, but of spirit. Resistance in the ghettos reminds us that the Holocaust was not only a story of victimhood, it was also a story of courage, defiance, and the refusal to let hatred define identity. These acts of bravery echo through history, inspiring generations to resist oppression. In April 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto erupted in flames of defiance. Thousands of Jews, armed with smuggled pistols and homemade bombs, rose against the Nazi war machine. They knew they could not win, but they chose to fight. Doomed for nearly a month, they held off German forces, turning the ghetto into a symbol of resistance. The uprising was led by young fighters, many barely in their 20s. They fought from bunkers, attics, and sewers, striking at soldiers with courage that defied logic. The Nazis responded with tanks, artillery, and fire, reducing the ghetto to rubble. Yet the fighters endured, refusing to surrender. The world watched in silence. Reports of the uprising reached Allied nations, but no help came. The fighters were alone, yet their struggle resonated far beyond Warsaw. They proved that even in the darkest times, resistance was possible. When the uprising was crushed, the ghetto lay in ruins. Thousands were killed, and survivors deported to camps. But the legacy of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising endures. It was a cry of defiance, a testament to human courage, and a reminder that dignity can be preserved even in the face of annihilation. The Holocaust was not chaos, it was organized destruction. Deportations were carried out with chilling efficiency. Trains became instruments of death, carrying millions to camps. Families were torn apart at stations, children separated from parents, and communities erased in hours. The process was deliberate. Jews were told they were being resettled, given false promises of work and safety. They boarded trains with suitcases, unaware they were traveling to death camps. The deception was part of the cruelty, stripping victims of hope before stripping them of life. The trains were overcrowded, with little air, no food, and no water. Days passed in darkness, screams echoing, bodies collapsing. For many, the journey itself was fatal. Those who survived arrived at camps broken, only to face selections and extermination. The machinery of deportation reveals the industrial nature of the Holocaust. It was not random violence, it was a system designed to annihilate. The trains symbolized the cold efficiency of genocide, turning human lives into cargo and hope into ashes. The trains that carried victims to Auschwitz were not ordinary journeys. They were the final passage into a world of terror. Families were crammed into cattle cars, sometimes 80 or more people in a single wagon, with no food, no water, and barely enough air to breathe. Days passed in suffocating darkness, the cries of children mingling with the groans of the sick. When the doors finally slid open, the sight was overwhelming: endless barbed wire fences, looming guard towers, and the chilling efficiency of soldiers barking orders. For many, this was their first glimpse of Auschwitz, a place that would become synonymous with death. Confusion reigned as families clutched one another, trying to understand where they were, unaware that this was not a camp of labor alone, but a factory of extermination. Selections began immediately on the platform. Officers, often with a casual flick of the wrist, decided who would live and who would die. One direction meant forced labor, the other meant the gas chambers. Mothers were separated from children, husbands from wives, and the elderly pushed aside. The process was swift, deliberate, and merciless. Families that had survived centuries together were torn apart in minutes, their cries echoing across the platform. The deception was cruel. Victims were told they were being resettled, given false promises of work, even instructed to carry suitcases, which were later confiscated and looted. Those selected for labor were tattooed with numbers, stripped of names and identities. Their belongings were stolen, their hair shaved, and their dignity erased. The camp was designed not only to destroy bodies, but to crush spirits. Prisoners were herded into barracks, overcrowded and filthy, where disease spread rapidly. The smell of burning flesh from nearby crematoria hung in the air, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited so many. Auschwitz was not simply a prison, it was a machine of death, operating with chilling precision. For those sent directly to the gas chambers, death came swiftly. The efficiency of Auschwitz was staggering: thousands murdered daily, their lives reduced to ash. Arrival at Auschwitz was not the beginning of imprisonment. For many, it was the end of life itself. Life inside Auschwitz and other camps was a relentless struggle against hunger, exhaustion, and despair. Prisoners woke before dawn, often to the sound of whistles and shouted orders, and were forced to stand for roll call in freezing temperatures. Hours could pass as guards counted and recounted, punishing even the smallest mistake. After roll call, prisoners marched to forced labor hauling stones, building roads, or working in factories that fueled the Nazi war machine. The work was grueling, designed to break bodies and spirits, and collapse often meant death. Food was scarce and deliberately insufficient. A watery soup, a crust of bread, sometimes nothing at all. This was the daily ration. Starvation hollowed faces, weakened bodies, and stole hope. Prisoners fought over scraps, shared crumbs with loved ones, or hid morsels to survive another day. Malnutrition left them vulnerable to disease, which spread rapidly in overcrowded barracks. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis claimed countless lives, often without medical care or compassion. Punishment was constant and brutal. A misstep, a whispered word, or a moment of weakness could mean beatings, torture, or execution. Guards wielded power with cruelty, reminding prisoners that survival was a privilege, not a right. Public hangings were staged to instill fear, forcing prisoners to watch as fellow inmates were killed. The atmosphere was one of terror, where every breath was uncertain. Yet even in these conditions, humanity flickered. Prisoners shared scraps of food, whispered prayers, and clung to memories of home. Some risked their lives to smuggle notes, preserve traditions, or teach children in secret. Survival was not only physical, it was about holding on to identity in a place designed to erase it. Daily life in the camps was a paradox, a world of unimaginable cruelty, yet also of quiet acts of defiance that kept hope alive. In the camps, science was twisted into cruelty. Prisoners became subjects of horrific medical experiments, stripped of consent and dignity. Doctors like Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, conducted procedures that defied morality, using human beings as test subjects. Mengele was fascinated by twins, subjecting them to injections, surgeries, and dissections, often killing them in the process. Children were injected with chemicals, prisoners exposed to diseases, and victims mutilated in the name of research. Experiments sought to test endurance, sterilize populations, and advance Nazi ideology of racial purity. The suffering was unimaginable, with victims enduring pain that often led to death. These experiments were not hidden. They were carried out openly, with meticulous records. The coldness of the process revealed the depth of Nazi dehumanization, treating lives as disposable tools for ideology. Doctors who had sworn to heal became instruments of torture, betraying the very essence of medicine. The legacy of these experiments is a reminder of how science, when stripped of ethics, can become a weapon. The victims were not statistics. They were human beings whose suffering must never be forgotten. Their stories stand as a warning of what happens when humanity abandons morality. Children were the most vulnerable victims of the Holocaust, and their suffering remains one of its most haunting legacies. In ghettos, they were the first to feel the pangs of hunger, their small bodies wasting away as food rations dwindled to nothing. Many were forced to scavenge in garbage heaps or risk their lives, smuggling bread and potatoes through cracks in ghetto walls. Their innocence was shattered as they watched parents beaten, neighbors disappear, and their world collapse into fear. Childhood games turned into survival strategies, and laughter was replaced by silence. For countless children, the Holocaust meant growing up too quickly or not growing up at all. In the camps, children were deemed unfit for labor and sent directly to gas chambers upon arrival. Babies were torn from mothers' arms, often killed immediately, while older children were separated and marched to their deaths. The Nazis saw no future in them, no value in their existence. Those few who survived did so under unimaginable circumstances, hiding in attics, cellars, or forests, dependent on strangers who risked everything to protect them. The trauma of separation, the terror of hiding, and the constant fear of discovery left scars that lasted a lifetime. Yet even in despair, children found ways to cling to life. In ghettos, they drew pictures of homes, gardens, and dreams of freedom. In camps, they whispered stories to one another, creating tiny islands of hope and oceans of fear. Some children became symbols of resilience, remembered through diaries and testimonies that survived when they did not. Anne Frank's words, written in hiding, captured the voice of millions silenced too soon. Her diary reminds us that behind every statistic was a child with dreams, fears, and a longing for life. The loss of millions of children is perhaps the most devastating aspect of the Holocaust. Their voices were silenced before they could grow. Their futures erased before they could unfold. They remind us that genocide is not only the destruction of the present, but the theft of the future. To remember the children of the Holocaust is to confront the deepest wound of humanity, the extinguishing of innocence by hatred. Women endured unique and harrowing experiences in the Holocaust. Upon arrival at camps, they were stripped, shaved, and forced into humiliation designed to erase their identity. Mothers were often separated from children, watching helplessly as their little ones were led away to death. The psychological torment of losing a child in such a brutal manner was a cruelty beyond words. Women were subjected to sexual violence, exploitation, and medical experiments that targeted their bodies and their ability to bear children. Daily life for women in camps was marked by exhaustion and degradation. They were forced into grueling labor sewing uniforms, producing weapons, or hauling heavy loads, often until collapse. Malnutrition and disease ravaged their bodies, while guards inflicted constant abuse. Pregnant women faced immediate execution, and newborns were killed without hesitation. The Nazis sought not only to destroy women physically, but to erase the possibility of future generations. Yet women also displayed extraordinary resilience. They formed support networks, sharing scraps of food, comforting one another, and protecting the weak. In ghettos, women organized underground schools, preserved traditions, and kept families together as long as possible. In camps, they whispered prayers, sang lullabies to children, and clung to fragments of humanity. Their strength was not only physical but emotional, sustaining others in moments of despair. The stories of women in the Holocaust remind us that survival was not only about enduring brutality, but about preserving dignity. Their courage in the face of unimaginable suffering is a testament to human endurance. They carried the weight of loss. The final solution was the formal plan to annihilate Europe's Jewish population, transforming hatred into systematic genocide. It was not a spontaneous act of war, but a carefully orchestrated policy, designed in meetings and executed with chilling precision. The Wannsee Conference, held in January 1942, brought together Nazi officials who discussed logistics, transportation, and methods of killing. In that room, genocide was planned like an administrative task, reducing millions of lives to numbers on paper. The final solution accelerated the machinery of death. Ghettos were liquidated, their inhabitants deported to camps. Trains ran on strict schedules, carrying thousands daily to extermination centers. Camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor expanded operations, building larger gas chambers and crematoria to handle the influx of victims. Bureaucrats, soldiers, and guards worked together in a system where genocide became routine. What makes the final solution so chilling is its bureaucratic nature. It was not chaos but order, not random violence but deliberate extermination. Records were kept, reports filed, and efficiency measured. The Nazis treated genocide as a state project, carried out with the same precision as building roads or managing factories. This cold, calculated approach reveals the depth of dehumanization, turning human lives into statistics and murder into administration. The final solution marked the point of no return. It transformed persecution into extermination, sealing the fate of millions. It reminds us that genocide is not only born of hatred, but sustained by systems, policies, and the willingness of ordinary people to participate. The final solution was not just a plan, it was the machinery of death, executed with terrifying efficiency. The gas chambers were the heart of the Holocaust machinery of death. Victims were told they were going to shower, handed soap, and led into sealed rooms. The deception was deliberate, designed to prevent panic and resistance. Once the doors closed, Zyklon B pellets were dropped, releasing lethal gas. Within minutes, screams filled the chamber, then silence. Families clung to one another, their final moments spent in terror. Death was swift, but the process was cruel. The chambers were designed to kill hundreds at once, turning mass murder into industrial efficiency. Bodies were piled together, stripped of valuables, and dragged out by prisoners forced to work in crematoria. These workers, known as Sonderkommandos, endured unimaginable trauma, compelled to handle the remains of their own people. The crematoria burned day and night, reducing bodies to ash. Smoke filled the air, carrying the scent of death across the camps. Ashes were scattered in rivers, fields, and forests, erasing evidence but leaving scars on the land. The scale of destruction was staggering. Thousands murdered daily, their lives reduced to dust. The gas chambers and crematoria symbolize the cold efficiency of genocide. They remind us that the Holocaust was not random violence, but a system designed to annihilate. The machinery of death was relentless, turning human lives into cargo and hope into ashes. To remember the gas chambers is to confront the darkest reflection of humanity, the transformation of murder into industry. While Auschwitz has become the most infamous symbol of the Holocaust, other camps like Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec were built with a singular purpose: extermination. Unlike Auschwitz, which combined forced labor with mass murder, these camps existed solely to kill. Hidden deep in forests and rural areas of occupied Poland, they were designed to operate quickly and efficiently, erasing entire communities within hours of arrival. Victims were transported by train, told they were being resettled, and upon arrival were stripped of belongings and dignity. There were no selections for labor here. Nearly everyone was sent directly to the gas chambers. These camps were small compared to Auschwitz, but their impact was staggering, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives in a matter of months. Treblinka alone murdered nearly 900,000 Jews, most within a single year. Sobibor and Belzec added hundreds of thousands more, their operations running with terrifying speed. The process was brutally efficient. Trains arrived, victims were unloaded, stripped, and marched into gas chambers disguised as showers. Within minutes, entire transports were dead. The Nazis perfected deception, ensuring victims had little chance to resist. The camps were surrounded by secrecy, hidden from the outside world, and guarded by SS officers and local collaborators who carried out the killings with chilling detachment. Despite the overwhelming odds, resistance did occur. In Sobibor, prisoners staged a revolt in October 1943, killing guards and escaping into the forests. Though many were recaptured or killed, some survived, and their testimony ensured the world would know what happened there. Treblinka also saw an uprising, where prisoners set fire to buildings and attempted escape. These acts of defiance were extraordinary, given the near-total control of the camps, and they remained symbols of courage in the face of annihilation. Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec were erased after the war, their structures destroyed by the Nazis in an attempt to hide evidence. Today, only memorials and fragments remain, silent witnesses to the scale of destruction. These camps remind us that the Holocaust was not confined to one place. It was a network of death factories spread across Europe. Their legacy is a chilling reminder of how quickly hatred can be transformed into machinery of extermination, and how entire communities can vanish in the span of a single train journey. The Holocaust could not have been carried out without the SS and camp guards, who enforced Nazi policies with brutality and precision. The SA, or Schutzstaffel, was the backbone of the Nazi terror system, responsible for running camps, organizing deportations, and carrying out mass shootings. Guards patrolled the fences, oversaw roll calls, and inflicted punishments with cruelty. They were the enforcers of a system designed to dehumanize and destroy, wielding power over life and death with chilling ease. Many of these men were not monsters by birth, but ordinary individuals who became perpetrators through ideology, obedience, and opportunity. Some joined the SS out of ambition, others out of belief in Nazi propaganda, and many simply followed orders. Yet their actions reveal the danger of blind obedience. They beat prisoners, oversaw executions, and participated in selections, often with indifference or even enjoyment. The psychology of the guards shows how ordinary people can commit extraordinary atrocities when authority and ideology strip away morality. The SS also created a culture of fear and loyalty. Guards were indoctrinated to see Jews and other victims as subhuman, making cruelty easier to justify. Rewards, promotions, and privileges reinforced their behavior, while dissent was punished harshly. This system ensured that genocide was not only ordered from above but carried out willingly by those below. The Holocaust was not the work of a few leaders alone. It was sustained by thousands of individuals who chose complicity over conscience. The role of the SS and guards reminds us that genocide requires perpetrators. It was not only Hitler or high-ranking officials who made the Holocaust possible, but countless men and women who enforced policies, operated camps, and carried out killings. Their actions force us to confront uncomfortable truths, that cruelty can be normalized, that obedience can override morality, and that ordinary people can become agents of extraordinary evil. The Holocaust was not carried out by Nazis alone. Across Europe, collaborators played a crucial role in persecution, betrayal, and extermination. In countries like France, Hungary, Lithuania, and Ukraine, local police, officials, and civilians assisted in rounding up Jews, enforcing ghettos, and facilitating deportations. Some did so out of fear, others out of hatred, and many out of indifference. Their cooperation expanded the reach of Nazi terror, ensuring that genocide was not confined to Germany but spread across the continent. In France, the Vichy government collaborated with Nazi occupiers, handing over thousands of Jews to be deported. In Hungary, local authorities worked with the Nazis to deport nearly 500,000 Jews in just a few months in 1944. In Eastern Europe, pogroms erupted, where neighbors turned on neighbors, attacking Jewish communities with violence and betrayal. Collaboration was not limited to governments. It included ordinary citizens who informed on Jews, profited from stolen property, or simply looked away. The motivations for collaboration were complex. Some feared punishment if they resisted. Others embraced anti-Semitic ideology, and many sought personal gain. Yet regardless of motive, the result was the same: communities destroyed, families betrayed, and lives lost. Collaboration reveals the fragility of morality in times of crisis, showing how quickly fear and prejudice can turn people into accomplices of evil. Collaboration across Europe shows that the Holocaust was not confined to Germany. It was a continental tragedy, enabled by silence, betrayal, and cooperation. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that genocide is not only the work of dictators, but also of ordinary people who choose complicity over courage. Remembering the collaborators is essential, not to excuse their actions, but to understand how hatred spreads and how societies can collapse into cruelty. As ghettos were liquidated and deportations intensified, some Jews chose to flee into forests, refusing to go quietly to their deaths. These men and women became partisans, resistance fighters who waged guerrilla warfare against the Nazis. Armed with stolen weapons, homemade explosives, and sheer determination, they lived in hiding, striking at German supply lines, sabotaging railways, and ambushing patrols. Life in the forests was brutal: freezing winters, constant hunger, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Yet for many, joining the partisans was not only about survival, but about reclaiming dignity in a world that sought to erase them. Partisan groups were diverse, including Jews, Poles, Russians, and others united by a common enemy. The forests became sanctuaries for those who escaped ghettos, offering a chance to fight back rather than await death. The risks were immense. German forces launched brutal campaigns to hunt partisans, burning villages suspected of aiding them, and executing civilians as punishment. Survival depended on secrecy, mobility, and the support of sympathetic locals. Despite these dangers, partisans carried out daring missions, disrupting Nazi operations and inspiring hope among oppressed communities. The story of the partisans is one of defiance. They remind us that even in the darkest times, resistance was possible. Their courage challenges the myth that Jews went passively to their deaths, showing instead that many chose to fight, even when victory was impossible. Amid the horror of the Holocaust, there were individuals who chose compassion over fear, risking their lives to save Jews. These rescuers are remembered as the righteous among the nations. They were farmers, teachers, priests, and ordinary citizens who defied Nazi orders, hiding families in attics, barns, and cellars. Their actions were not grand military campaigns, but quiet acts of humanity that carried immense risk. In occupied Europe, helping Jews meant death if discovered. Yet thousands chose to act, driven by conscience, faith, or simple human decency. Some forged documents, smuggled food, or guided families across borders. Others sheltered children, raising them as their own. Each act of rescue was a beacon of light in a world consumed by darkness. The stories of the righteous are diverse. In Poland, Irina Sendler smuggled hundreds of children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, hiding them with Catholic families. In the Netherlands, Corrie ten Boom sheltered Jews in her home, enduring imprisonment herself. These individuals remind us that even in times of terror, humanity can prevail. The righteous among the nations stand as proof that choices mattered. While many remain silent, some chose courage. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evil, individual actions can save lives and preserve hope. One of the most remarkable rescuers was Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat in Hungary. June 1944. As the Nazis deported Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz, Wallenberg launched a daring mission to save lives. Using his position and ingenuity, he issued thousands of protective passports, declaring Jews under Swedish protection. His actions saved tens of thousands from certain death. Wallenberg's methods were bold and creative. He confronted German officers directly, demanding the release of Jews from trains. He established safe houses, providing shelter and food to those in hiding. His courage was not only in paperwork but in physical defiance, standing against armed soldiers with nothing but determination. The risks were immense. Wallenberg operated under constant threat, knowing the Nazis could arrest or kill him at any moment. Yet he persisted, driven by a sense of duty and humanity. His work in Budapest remains one of the most extraordinary rescue efforts of the Holocaust. Raoul Wallenberg's fate remains a mystery. Arrested by Soviet forces in 1945, he disappeared into prisons, never seen again. Yet his legacy endures, remembered as a man who chose courage over silence, saving thousands and proving that one individual can make a profound difference. In Denmark, an entire nation rose to defiance. When the Nazis ordered the deportation of Danish Jews in 1943, ordinary citizens launched a massive rescue operation. Fishermen ferried families across the sea to neutral Sweden, while neighbors hid Jews in homes, hospitals, and churches. Within weeks, nearly 7,000 Jews, almost the entire Jewish population of Denmark, were saved. The rescue was a collective effort involving farmers, doctors, students, and clergy. It was not the work of a few heroes, but of a society that refused to accept injustice. The Danish people demonstrated that resistance could be national, that compassion could overcome fear. The risks were enormous. German patrols guarded the coasts, and discovery meant execution. Yet the Danish people persisted, guided by solidarity and moral conviction. Their success remains one of the most inspiring stories of the Holocaust. The Danish rescue shows what is possible when a community chooses humanity. It reminds us that courage is not only individual but collective, and that even in times of terror, nations can stand against evil. Not all resistance was armed. Spiritual resistance was the quiet defiance of preserving identity, culture, and faith in the face of annihilation. In ghettos and camps, Jews continued to pray, teach, and create art, refusing to let the Nazis erase their humanity. These acts were small in scale but immense in meaning, sustaining hope when survival seemed impossible. Teachers held secret classes, rabbis conducted clandestine services, and musicians composed songs in hidden corners. Diaries and poems recorded experiences, ensuring that voices would endure even if lives did not. Spiritual resistance was about affirming life, declaring that even in despair, dignity remained. For many, faith became a source of strength. Lighting a candle, reciting a prayer, or teaching a child the Hebrew alphabet was an act of defiance. These gestures preserved continuity, connecting victims to generations past and future. They reminded communities that identity could not be destroyed by hatred. Often, spiritual resistance reveals the depth of human resilience. It shows that resistance is not only about weapons but about memory, culture, and spirit. In preserving their humanity, victims of the Holocaust defied the Nazis' attempt to erase them, leaving a legacy of courage that endures to this day. Before the gas chambers became the primary method of extermination, the Holocaust unfolded in fields, forests, and ravines across Eastern Europe. The Einsatzgruppen mobile killing units followed the German army as it advanced into the Soviet Union in 1941. Their mission was clear: to eliminate Jews, Roma, and political opponents. Villages were surrounded, families rounded up, and entire communities marched to secluded areas. There, victims were forced to dig their own graves or stand at the edge of ravines before being shot. These massacres were not hidden. They were carried out in broad daylight, often witnessed by local populations. The scale of these shootings was staggering. At Baby Yar, near Kiev, over 33,000 Jews were murdered in just 2 days. Similar massacres occurred in Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, and countless other places. The sound of gunfire echoed across the countryside, leaving behind silence and mass graves. Unlike the camps, these killings were intimate, face-to-face, with perpetrators looking directly at their victims. The psychological toll on both victims and perpetrators was immense, yet the killings continued relentlessly. Local collaborators often assisted, either out of fear, hatred, or opportunism. Civilians sometimes watched, some participated, and others looted the belongings of the dead. The Einsatzgruppen documented their actions meticulously, sending reports back to Berlin that detailed numbers killed. These records reveal the cold bureaucracy behind the massacres, reducing human lives to statistics. The mass shootings on the Eastern Front were a precursor to the industrialized genocide that followed. The ravines and forests of Eastern Europe remain silent witnesses to this chapter, reminders that genocide can begin not with machines, but with guns in human hands. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, was the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest military campaign in history. It was not only a war of conquest but a war of ideology. Hitler saw the Soviet Union as both a political enemy and a racial one, home to Jews and slaves whom he deemed inferior. The invasion unleashed unprecedented violence, transforming the Holocaust into a continental catastrophe. As German troops advanced, they carried with them orders to destroy Jewish communities. Ghettos were established, mass shootings carried out, and deportations intensified. The brutality was immediate and overwhelming. Villages were burned, civilians executed, and survivors forced into ghettos that became holding pens for extermination. Operation Barbarossa expanded the reach of the Holocaust, bringing millions more under Nazi control. The invasion also marked the beginning of systematic extermination on a massive scale. Einsatzgruppen followed the army, carrying out mass shootings that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The chaos of war provided cover for genocide, allowing the Nazis to escalate their policies without restraint. The Eastern Front became a landscape of destruction, where war and genocide merged into one. Operation Barbarossa was a turning point. It transformed the Holocaust from persecution into mass extermination, expanding its scope and intensity. It revealed the Nazis' ultimate goal, not only to conquer territory, but to annihilate populations. The invasion stands as a reminder that war can be a catalyst for genocide, unleashing violence that consumes entire nations. On January 20, 1942, 15 Nazi officials gathered in a villa on the outskirts of Berlin. This meeting, known as the Wannsee Conference, formalized the final solution. Around a polished table, bureaucrats discussed logistics, transportation, and methods of killing. The tone was cold, detached, and administrative, as if they were planning a business project rather than genocide. The conference was led by Reinhard Heydrich, one of the architects of the Holocaust. He outlined plans to deport Jews from across Europe to extermination camps in the East. The officials debated numbers, routes, and categories of victims. The language was clinical, referring to human beings as units to be processed. What makes the Wannsee Conference chilling is its ordinariness. It was not a fiery rally or a battlefield decision, but a bureaucratic meeting. Genocide was discussed in terms of efficiency, coordination, and paperwork. The participants were educated men, lawyers, administrators, and officers who turned their skills toward mass murder. The Wannsee Conference reveals the machinery behind the Holocaust. It shows that genocide is not only carried out by soldiers, but enabled by bureaucrats who plan, organize, and administer. It reminds us that evil can wear the face of professionalism, and that ordinary meetings can decide the fate of millions. As the Holocaust unfolded, reports began to reach Allied nations. Refugees, resistance fighters, and diplomats sent warnings about ghettos, deportations, and camps. Newspapers published accounts, and governments received intelligence. Yet disbelief and indifference often muted the response. The scale of the atrocities seemed unimaginable, and many dismissed the reports as exaggerations. 1942, evidence of mass killings was undeniable. The Polish government in exile reported on extermination camps, and Jewish organizations pleaded for action. Allied leaders acknowledged the reports, but prioritized military victory over intervention. The war effort consumed resources, and rescuing Jews was seen as secondary. The lack of action had devastating consequences. Borders remained closed, refugees were turned away, and deportations continued. The Allies condemned the killings, but offered little practical help. For victims, the silence of the world was another layer of betrayal. Allied awareness of the Holocaust raises difficult questions. Why did nations hesitate to act? Could more lives have been saved? The answers are complex, but the reality is clear. Millions died while the world watched. This chapter reminds us that silence in the face of atrocity is complicity, and that awareness without action is not enough. The Holocaust was not only a story of victims and perpetrators, but also of bystanders. Across Europe and beyond, millions knew of the persecution yet remained silent. Some feared punishment, others embraced indifference, and many chose not to see. This silence allowed the Nazis to carry out genocide with little resistance. Neighbors watched as Jews were deported, businesses looted, and synagogues destroyed. Some profited from stolen property, others took over abandoned homes. Indifference became complicity, as silence enabled cruelty. The Holocaust thrived not only on hatred, but on apathy. Internationally, governments hesitated to act. Borders closed, visas denied, and refugees turned away. The indifference of nations compounded the suffering, leaving victims isolated and abandoned. Silence was not neutral, it was deadly. The story of silence and indifference is a warning. It reminds us that genocide is not only carried out by those who kill, but by those who look away. The Holocaust teaches that moral courage is essential, and that silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of violence. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops entered Auschwitz, uncovering horrors that defied imagination. What they found was not a battlefield but a graveyard of humanity. The camp was nearly empty. as the Nazis had evacuated thousands on death marches, leaving behind only the weakest prisoners. Emaciated survivors stumbled forward, their hollow eyes reflecting years of suffering. Barracks were filled with corpses, crematoria stood silent, and warehouses overflowed with stolen belongings, shoes, glasses, children's toys, each a silent testimony to lives erased. The soldiers were unprepared for what they saw. Hardened by years of war, they had witnessed destruction, but nothing compared to the systematic cruelty of Auschwitz. The liberation was both a moment of triumph and of horror. Survivors greeted their liberators with disbelief, too weak to celebrate, too traumatized to comprehend freedom. The soldiers offered food and care, but the wounds of starvation and disease ran deep. The liberation was not only the end of a camp, but the unveiling of truth. It marked the beginning of reckoning, as the world realized the depths of Nazi crimes. For survivors, liberation was bittersweet. Freedom came after years of torment, but families were gone, communities destroyed, and futures uncertain. Auschwitz was liberated, but its shadow would never fade. The day remains a symbol of both human resilience and the darkest cruelty ever unleashed. In April 1945, American troops liberated Dachau, one of the first concentration camps established by the Nazis. What they encountered was a scene of unimaginable horror. Thousands of prisoners lay dead or dying, their bodies piled in barracks and railcars. Survivors, skeletal and weak, staggered forward, their faces etched with suffering. The stench of death filled the air, overwhelming even battle-hardened soldiers. The liberation of Dachau was not only a military victory but a moral awakening. Soldiers who had fought across Europe were confronted with the reality of genocide. Many wept openly, unable to comprehend the cruelty they witnessed. The camp revealed the true nature of Nazi ideology, exposing the depths of human depravity. The shock of Dachau reverberated across America. Photographs and reports brought the Holocaust into public consciousness, forcing citizens to confront the atrocities committed. The liberation became a turning point, shaping how the world understood the war and its consequences. For survivors, Dachau's liberation was both salvation and trauma. Freedom came with the realization that families were gone, futures uncertain, and scars permanent. The camp was liberated, but the memories endured, reminding the world of the cost of silence and indifference. In April 1945, British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen, uncovering scenes of devastation that defied belief. The camp was not an extermination center like Auschwitz, but a place of starvation, disease, and neglect. Thousands lay dead, their bodies scattered across the grounds. Survivors were skeletal, too weak to stand, their eyes reflecting despair. The camp was a landscape of death where humanity had been stripped away. The soldiers were overwhelmed by the scale of suffering. They rushed to provide food and medical care, but many survivors were too weak to recover. Disease spread rapidly, claiming lives even after liberation. The soldiers themselves fell ill, unprepared for the conditions they encountered. The liberation of Bergen-Belsen shocked the world. Photographs of emaciated survivors and piles of corpses were published globally, forcing nations to confront the reality of Nazi cruelty. The camp became a symbol of the Holocaust, its name synonymous with suffering. For survivors, Bergen-Belsen was both the end of torment and the beginning of healing. Freedom came with immense challenges, as they struggled to rebuild lives shattered by years of persecution. The camp's liberation remains a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the necessity of remembrance. Liberation brought freedom, but it also brought confusion, trauma, and uncertainty. Survivors emerged from camp skeletal and weak, their bodies ravaged by starvation and disease. Many were too ill to celebrate, collapsing in exhaustion as soldiers offered food and care. The first days of freedom were filled with both relief and despair, as survivors realized families were gone and communities destroyed. Medical teams worked tirelessly to save lives, but many survivors died even after liberation, their bodies too damaged to recover. Some were unable to speak, others wept uncontrollably, and many remained silent, their pain too deep for words. The first days of freedom were also marked by resilience. Survivors clung to one another, forming bonds of support and solidarity. They shared stories, mourned losses, and began the slow process of healing. Freedom was fragile, but it offered hope. For survivors, the first days of freedom were the beginning of a new journey. They faced immense challenges, but they also carried the strength of endurance. Their resilience reminds us that even in the darkest times, humanity can survive. After liberation, survivors faced the challenge of rebuilding lives in a world that no longer felt like home. Millions were displaced, with nowhere to return. Families were gone, communities destroyed, and countries hostile. Displaced persons, DP camps, were established across Europe, offering shelter, food, and medical care. These camps became temporary homes for survivors, places of both healing and uncertainty. Life in DP camps was complex. Survivors struggled with trauma, grief, and the challenge of starting anew. Some sought to emigrate to America, Palestine, or other countries, while others remained in Europe, unsure of their future. The camps were filled with both despair and hope as survivors clung to the possibility of rebuilding. Despite the challenges, DP became centers of resilience. Schools were established, cultural activities resumed, and communities began to reform. Survivors married, had children, and rebuilt families, determined to reclaim life from the ashes of destruction. The camps were not only places of survival but of renewal. The displaced persons camps remind us that liberation was not the end of the Holocaust, but the beginning of a new struggle. Survivors faced immense challenges, but they also carried the strength of endurance. Their resilience in DP camps laid the foundation for future generations, ensuring that life continued despite the horrors endured. In November 1945, the world gathered in Nuremberg, Germany, to confront the architects of the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials were unprecedented for the first time in history. Leaders of a defeated regime were held accountable for crimes against humanity. In a courtroom filled with judges, prosecutors, and survivors, the evidence of genocide was laid bare. Photographs of camps, testimonies of victims, and documents signed by Nazi officials revealed the scale of destruction. The trials were not only about punishment, but about establishing a moral precedent that no one, not even heads of state, could escape justice for crimes against humanity. 22 major Nazi leaders stood trial, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. They faced charges of war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. The proceedings were meticulous, with prosecutors presenting mountains of evidence. Survivors testified, their voices trembling as they recounted horrors endured. The defendants often denied responsibility, claiming they were just following orders. This defense was rejected, establishing the principle that obedience does not absolve guilt. The verdicts were historic. 12 defendants were sentenced to death, others received long prison terms, and a few were acquitted. The trials exposed the machinery of Nazi terror, revealing how ideology, bureaucracy, and obedience combined to create genocide. The courtroom became a stage where the world confronted the darkest chapter of history, demanding accountability. The Nuremberg trials were more than legal proceedings, they were a moral reckoning. They established international law against genocide and crimes against humanity, shaping future justice systems. For survivors, the trials offered a measure of closure, though no verdict could restore what was lost. Nuremberg remains a symbol of justice, reminding us that accountability is essential to prevent future atrocities. After the war, many Nazis escaped justice, fleeing across Europe and beyond. Some hid in plain sight, while others sought refuge in South America, aided by sympathetic governments and secret networks. Survivors and governments refused to let them vanish. Nazi hunters emerged, determined to track down perpetrators and bring them to justice. Their mission was not only legal but moral, to ensure that those responsible for genocide could not live freely while their victims lay in graves. Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor, became one of the most famous Nazi hunters. He dedicated his life to tracking fugitives, gathering evidence, and pressing governments to act. His work led to the capture of numerous war criminals, keeping the memory of victims alive. Other organizations, including Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, launched daring missions to capture notorious figures. The pursuit of Nazis was fraught with challenges. Many lived under false identities, protected by communities or governments unwilling to confront the past. Yet hunters persisted, driven by the belief that justice must be pursued, no matter how long it takes. Their work revealed the global dimensions of the Holocaust, showing how its perpetrators scattered across continents. The hunt for Nazis reminds us that justice is not bound by time. Decades after the war, perpetrators were still being found and tried. This pursuit underscores the importance of memory and accountability, ensuring that crimes against humanity cannot be forgotten or forgiven. In 1960, Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the final solution, was captured in Argentina by Mossad agents. His trial in Jerusalem became a global event, bringing the Holocaust into public consciousness in a new way. Eichmann had overseen deportations, organizing trains that carried millions to their deaths. His capture and trial symbolized the determination to hold even the most elusive perpetrators accountable. The trial was groundbreaking. Survivors testified publicly, sharing stories that had long remained hidden. Their voices filled the courtroom, transforming statistics into human experiences. The world listened as men and women recounted ghettos, camps, and loss. For many, it was the first time they spoke openly about their suffering, and the trial became a platform for memory. Eichmann's defense was chillingly familiar. He claimed he was just following orders. He portrayed himself as a bureaucrat, a cog in the machine, denying personal responsibility. The court rejected this argument, emphasizing that individuals are accountable for their actions, regardless of orders. Eichmann was found guilty and executed in 1962, his death marking a milestone in the pursuit of justice. The Eichmann trial was more than a legal case. It was a moral confrontation. It forced the world to listen to survivors, to confront the reality of genocide, and to recognize the responsibility of individuals in systems of evil. The trial remains a symbol of justice, memory, and the enduring fight against denial. For Germany, the Holocaust was not only a crime but a national wound. After the war, the country faced the immense challenge of reckoning with its past. At first, silence prevailed. Many Germans denied knowledge, minimized responsibility, or sought to move on. But as evidence mounted and trials unfolded, the truth became undeniable. Germany had to confront the reality that millions of its citizens had participated in or enabled genocide. Reckoning came slowly. Schools began teaching about the Holocaust, memorials were built, and survivors' testimonies were preserved. The government acknowledged responsibility, offering reparations to victims and their families. This process was painful, forcing a nation to confront its darkest chapter. Yet it was essential for healing and rebuilding trust. Generations of Germans grappled with questions of guilt, responsibility, and identity. Children asked parents what they had done during the war, and silence often revealed complicity. The reckoning was not only political but personal, as families confronted uncomfortable truths. This process shaped Germany's post-war identity, emphasizing democracy, human rights, and remembrance. Germany's reckoning reminds us that confronting history is essential. Denial and silence perpetuate harm, while acknowledgement and memory pave the way for healing. The nation's journey shows that even after unimaginable crimes, societies can choose responsibility, ensuring that never again becomes more than a slogan. For survivors, liberation was only the beginning of a new struggle. They emerged from camps with bodies weakened, families destroyed, and futures uncertain. Many had lost everything: parents, children, homes, and communities. Rebuilding life after such devastation seemed impossible. Yet survivors carried resilience forged in suffering. Their journey was not only about survival but about reclaiming humanity. Many emigrated to America, Israel, and other countries, seeking safety and opportunity. They built new families, careers, and communities, determined to create futures from the ashes of destruction. Their resilience was extraordinary, transforming trauma into strength. Survivors became teachers, writers, and leaders, sharing their stories to ensure the world remembered. The process of rebuilding was fraught with challenges. Trauma lingered, memories haunted, and silence often prevailed. Yet survivors found ways to heal through faith, culture, and community. They carried scars, but they also carried hope, proving that life could continue even after unimaginable loss. Survivors rebuilding lives is a testament to human endurance. Their stories remind us that resilience is possible, that hope can emerge from despair, and that memory is essential for justice. They ensured that the Holocaust was not only a story of death but also of survival, courage, and renewal. When the war ended, survivors carried with them memories too heavy to bear, yet too vital to remain unspoken. Testimonies became the bridge between silence and remembrance. Men and women who had endured ghettos, camps, and death marches began to share their stories, often with trembling voices and tears. These accounts transformed the Holocaust from statistics into human experiences, reminding the world that behind every number was a face, a family, and a dream extinguished. Testimonies were not only personal catharsis but historical evidence, ensuring that denial could never erase truth. Early testimonies were often met with disbelief. The horrors described seemed unimaginable, and many survivors struggled to find listeners willing to understand. Yet over time, their voices grew louder, recorded in books, interviews, and documentaries. Survivors like Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi became powerful witnesses, their words shaping global memory. Each testimony carried the weight of millions, speaking for those who could no longer speak. Testimonies also served as warnings. Survivors emphasized that the Holocaust was not only about the past, but about the dangers of hatred in the present. Their stories became moral lessons, urging societies to resist prejudice and indifference. By sharing their pain, survivors transformed suffering into education, ensuring that future generations would learn from history. The role of testimonies is irreplaceable. They remind us that history is not abstract but lived, felt, and endured. Survivors' voices are the heartbeat of Holocaust memory, carrying truth across decades. Their courage in speaking ensures that the world cannot forget and that humanity is forever reminded of the cost of silence. As survivors aged, the responsibility of remembrance shifted to institutions, educators, and communities. Holocaust education became essential, ensuring that future generations understood the magnitude of genocide. Schools introduced curricula, museums opened their doors, and memorials were built to preserve memory. Education was not only about facts and dates, but about empathy, teaching students to see victims as human beings rather than statistics. Holocaust education faced challenges. Some questioned its relevance, others resisted confronting uncomfortable truths. Yet educators persisted, using testimonies, films, and literature to bring history to life. Visits to memorials and camps offered powerful experiences, allowing students to stand where victims once stood. These lessons were designed not only to inform, but to inspire moral responsibility. Education also evolved with technology. Digital archives preserved testimonies, virtual reality recreated ghettos and camps, and online resources expanded access worldwide. These innovations ensured that memory would endure even as survivors passed away. The Holocaust became a global subject, taught across cultures and nations. Holocaust education is more than history, it is a safeguard for humanity. It teaches the dangers of hatred, the importance of empathy, and the necessity of vigilance. By educating future generations, societies honor victims and ensure that never again is not just a phrase but a commitment. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, art and literature became powerful tools for expression. Survivors and witnesses turned to creativity to process trauma, preserve memory, and communicate experiences that words alone could not capture. Paintings, poems, novels, and plays emerged, each carrying fragments of suffering and resilience. Art became a language of remembrance, speaking where silence had reigned. Literature offered profound insights into the human condition. Works like Elie Wiesel's Night and Primo Levi's If This Is a Man revealed the depths of suffering and the resilience of spirit. These books became essential reading, shaping global understanding of the Holocaust. Poetry and diaries captured intimate moments, preserving voices that might otherwise have been lost. Visual art also played a crucial role. Survivors sketched scenes from ghettos and camps, creating haunting images that conveyed emotions beyond words. Sculptures and memorials emerged, transforming grief into public remembrance. Art became both personal healing and collective memory, ensuring that the Holocaust was not forgotten. Art and literature remind us that memory is not only factual but emotional. They preserve the humanity of victims, allowing future generations to feel as well as know. Creativity became a form of resistance, ensuring that even in destruction, voices endured. Film became one of the most powerful mediums for Holocaust remembrance. Documentaries captured testimonies, while feature films dramatized experiences, bringing history to global audiences. Movies like Schindler's List and The Pianist portrayed courage and suffering, reaching millions and shaping public understanding. Film transformed memory into visual storytelling, making the Holocaust accessible to those far removed from its history. Documentaries provided authenticity, using survivor interviews and archival footage to preserve truth. They offered raw, unfiltered glimpses into ghettos, camps, and liberation. These films became educational tools, ensuring that memory was preserved with accuracy. Feature films balanced drama with history, often sparking debate about representation. Some criticized them for oversimplification, while others praised their ability to reach wide audiences. Regardless, films kept the Holocaust in public consciousness, ensuring that stories continued to be told. The Holocaust in film demonstrates the power of storytelling. Visual media captures emotions, immerses audiences, and preserves memory in ways that words alone cannot. Film ensures that the Holocaust remains alive in collective imagination, reminding us of both tragedy and resilience. Despite overwhelming evidence, Holocaust denial and distortion emerged in the decades after the war. Some claimed the genocide was exaggerated, others insisted it never happened. These lies sought to erase memory insult survivors, and perpetuate hatred. Denial was not ignorance but deliberate distortion, often fueled by anti-Semitism and political agendas. Survivors confronted denial with testimonies, educators with evidence, and historians with research. Museums and archives preserved documents, photographs, and artifacts, ensuring that truth remained undeniable. Denial was met with resistance as societies recognized the danger of forgetting. Distortion also appeared in subtler forms, minimizing numbers, shifting blame, or equating the Holocaust with unrelated events. These distortions diluted memory, undermining the uniqueness of genocide. Confronting them required vigilance, education, and moral clarity. Denial and distortion remind us that memory is fragile. The Holocaust must be defended against lies, ensuring that truth endures. Preserving accuracy is not only about history but about justice, honoring victims and protecting humanity from repeating its darkest chapter. The Holocaust reshaped the world's understanding of human rights. The sheer scale of suffering forced nations to confront the fragility of dignity and the dangers of unchecked hatred. Millions had been stripped of identity, reduced to numbers, and murdered simply for existing. This atrocity revealed that rights cannot be assumed, they must be protected by law and defended by society. The Holocaust became the catalyst for a new global commitment to human rights, ensuring that such crimes would never be tolerated again. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a direct response to the horrors of the Holocaust. It declared that all people are entitled to life, liberty, and security, regardless of race, religion, or background. The declaration was not abstract. It was born from the ashes of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and countless other places of suffering. It sought to prevent future genocides by establishing a moral and legal foundation for human dignity. The Holocaust also influenced the creation of international laws against genocide. The Genocide Convention of 1948 defined genocide as a crime under international law, ensuring accountability for future atrocities. These legal frameworks were designed to protect vulnerable populations, recognizing that silence and indifference had enabled the Holocaust. The legacy of the Holocaust in human rights is profound. It reminds us that rights are not gifts but guarantees that must be defended. The Holocaust transformed suffering into a global commitment, ensuring that humanity would strive to protect dignity, equality, and justice for all. Despite the vow of never again, genocides continued after the Holocaust. In Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, millions were murdered, proving that hatred and indifference remain powerful forces. These tragedies revealed that the lessons of the Holocaust had not been fully learned, and that vigilance is always necessary. In Cambodia during the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge targeted intellectuals, minorities, and perceived enemies, killing nearly 2 million people. In Rwanda in 1994, the Hutu regime orchestrated the massacre of nearly 800,000 Tutsis in just 100 days. In Bosnia, ethnic cleansing claimed thousands of lives, with atrocities committed in places like Srebrenica. Each genocide carried echoes of the Holocaust propaganda, dehumanization, and systematic murder. These genocides remind us that hatred is not confined to one time or place. They reveal the fragility of societies and the dangers of silence. The Holocaust provided a blueprint for prevention, but the world has often failed to act in time. The repetition of genocide underscores the importance of memory and vigilance. Genocides after 1945 are a sobering reminder that never again must be more than words. They challenge humanity to confront prejudice, resist indifference, and act decisively against injustice. The Holocaust remains a warning, but its lessons must be applied continually to prevent future tragedies. Memory is not passive, it is a responsibility. The Holocaust demands remembrance, not only to honor victims, but to prevent repetition. Forgetting is dangerous, allowing denial and distortion to thrive. Remembering ensures that the lessons of history remain alive, guiding societies toward justice and compassion. Remembrance takes many forms: memorials, museums, education, and testimonies. Each act of memory preserves the humanity of victims, ensuring they are not reduced to statistics. Remembering is also about confronting uncomfortable truths, acknowledging complicity, and resisting indifference. It is a moral duty that transcends generations. The responsibility to remember extends beyond Jewish communities. It belongs to all humanity. The Holocaust was a crime against humanity, and its lessons apply universally. Remembering teaches empathy, vigilance, and courage, reminding us that silence enables cruelty. The responsibility to remember is a call to action. It demands that societies confront hatred, resist prejudice, and defend dignity. Memory is not only about the past but about shaping the future, ensuring that humanity does not repeat its darkest chapter. As survivors age, the responsibility of memory passes to their children and grandchildren. The next generation carries the voices of those who endured, ensuring that stories continue to be told. They inherit trauma, but also resilience, transforming pain into education and advocacy. Their voices keep memory alive, bridging past and future. Children of survivors often grapple with questions of identity, responsibility, and legacy. They grow up with stories of ghettos and camps, shaping their worldview. Many dedicate their lives to preserving memory, becoming educators, writers, and activists. Their work ensures that the Holocaust remains central to human consciousness. The next generation also faces challenges. Denial and distortion threaten memory, and indifference grows with time. Yet they persist, using technology, art, and education to reach new audiences. Their voices adapt to modern contexts, ensuring that memory remains relevant. The voices of the next generation remind us that memory is not static but living. They carry the torch of remembrance, ensuring that the Holocaust is never forgotten. Their commitment ensures that never again remains a promise, passed from survivors to future generations. The phrase, "never again," emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust, a vow that humanity would never allow such atrocities to occur again. It is both a promise and a challenge, demanding vigilance, courage, and action. Never again is not only about the past, but about the present and future, reminding us that hatred and indifference remain threats. Never again requires more than words, it requires deeds. It demands that societies confront prejudice, resist authoritarianism, and defend human rights. It calls for education, remembrance, and moral courage. The Holocaust teaches that silence enables cruelty, and never again insists that silence must be broken. The phrase also carries hope. It reflects humanity's capacity to learn, to change, and to build a better future. It is a reminder that resilience can emerge from suffering, and that memory can inspire justice. Never again is both a warning and a vision, guiding societies toward compassion. The Holocaust remains the darkest chapter of history, but its lessons illuminate the path forward. Never again is the final vow of remembrance, ensuring that victims are honored, survivors respected, and humanity protected. It is a call to all generations, demanding that the world never repeat its greatest tragedy.